Kia ora everyone, and welcome to Taranaki and Cannabis, the informed discussion. This is not a political debate, this is a discussion. Greetings if you're watching this on YouTube or social media or Facebook, and arahara and appreciation to Mad Media, both Edward and Bronwyn, who are filming this professionally, and that's just absolutely awesome. I want to thank and acknowledge the Johnson Corner for allowing us to use this amazing space. And just before I profile our terrific guests, a little bit about me. I'm Brian Vickery, happy to be your MC and probably won't need to be a moderator. I'm a journalist for NZME, and I just wanted to make a brief statement that I personally have decided to vote yes for the legalisation of marijuana, which is quite unusual given my upbringing of a very conservative Christian upbringing. In the last 30 years I have been a chaplain and a pastor. I've gone to prison many times visiting inmates that are there because of drugs. I remember on one occasion in 1997, one of my church members at Taranaki, their partner was shot dead by Stephen Anderson, who was suffering by schizophrenia. That day, February 8, 1997, he shot dead 6 people. Now, I'm not blaming cannabis, but the media said cannabis-fueled mayhem in just out of Taranaki. Also visited a prison once of a young man who supposedly was doing cannabis, and he burnt down a historic church. So all of those things, in addition to being a journalist and used to ZB and a high school teacher, have probably given me an anecdotal prejudice towards cannabis. So why am I voting yes for the legalisation of cannabis? Because I think the status quo is not working. I think the law is an ass. In the last 2 years, the police have been saying we're using our discretion. You'd be interested in the last year, there were 230 arrests for cannabis. Only five people went to jail, and when you drill it down, they chose to go to jail because of paying excessive fines. And the other interesting thing is, if you look at the New Zealand Health Report, for 2012 and 13, Māori were twice as likely to be arrested or get in trouble with the law because of cannabis. So in the past, there's been evidence of discrimination and maybe even institutional racism. So I think the time has come to view it, in my opinion, as a health issue and to try something new, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion today. So what we're going to do, we're going to get everyone to give their opening position statement. It could be a little bit of their journey. You don't have to say which way you're voting. That's your prerogative. But I've come clean, much probably to the surprise and chagrin of my conservative family. So it's my pleasure to showcase our first speaker, Alvisa. We're so proud of you. You are on the Taranaki Regional Council. You were recently showcased in the Taranaki Daily News for doing a good job. You're also an environmental scientist. You need to flick on the switch and eat the microphone. And we're probably looking for maybe a 3 or 4 minute opening position statement, a little bit about your journey, and then we will go through everyone, and then we'll have some interaction. Over to you.
Kia ora everyone. Thank you so much for hosting this evening, the whole team here for coming along and being somewhat brave and coming forward and being honest with ourselves. My first point I want to make is that I'm not speaking on behalf of the Taranaki Regional Council. I am speaking as a scientist and an ethnically ambiguous member of the community. And I believe that the proposed legislation can provide Aotearoa with the opportunity to change our nation's cultural relationship with this medicinal and therapeutic plant from a social stigma and economic drain to a social and economic benefit. There's a couple of points that I feel that sort of support this statement. We're currently in a position, having been got to this point after what's happened in America and other parts of the world, we're in a position to learn from the decriminalisation and legalisation of cannabis in other countries. So overseas, we've seen that there are countries that have just decriminalised it and approached cannabis as a health issue. they haven't all necessarily legalised them. So having these comparisons between different countries and what has worked and what hasn't worked, we're in a really great place to actually build something, and what we've got so far, what they've proposed so far, is in line with the evidence that has come to light so far. We have the benefits of, like for instance, case study, in Paraguay they've decriminalised and approached it as a health problem. In countries like the Philippines, at the other end of the response spectrum, they have just done the complete opposite and treated anyone with cannabis or any other kind of drug on them as like they just get shot dead. And unfortunately, it's really extreme over there, and the person who has led that operation nationally has admitted that that approach has not worked and it hasn't made a dent in the problem at all. For instance, where one gang leader selling drugs or distributing it, when they get sort of taken out, there is always someone waiting in line to take their spot. So that's just two, different approaches to this issue in other countries, and just an example of evidence-based decision making. So that's just kind of a general overview of my stance.
And are you at this stage, and it's totally your call, are you willing to intimate which way you're planning to vote?
Oh, definitely. I've already voted yes.
All right, I'll get you to pass the microphone over there to the expert panellist. Now, I got some wonderful coaching from your sister, Puna. She even recorded. She said, "Hello, my beautiful friend. Now, my sister's name." So she said, "Concentrate on the middle." I'll say this with love from the land of Kath and Kim. Here we go. Hene Nui, Juan O'Brien. Oh, not close, but you're very kind. You are a health and social services expert. You are a beautiful person. I have interviewed you before. I'm really, really keen to hear your musings and what you have to share on the topic tonight.
Tēnā no tātou e te whānau, he pua wai au no roto i te raukura. Ko taku raukura rā he mana wanui ki te ao, ko Taranaki te maunga, ko Taranaki te tangata, ko Taranaki te iwi. Ko hine nui Juan O'Brien tōku ingoa. Kia ora everyone, tēnei te mihi nui kia koe Adnan, me tō whānau, te Belushi whānau, mō tō tūwhiratanga i tēnei wāhi te pōnei. Tēnei te mihi hoki kia koe Dan, nau I tūtuki pai tēnei kaupapa kia tai ai tātou, kia horahia ai tō tātou māramatanga I runga I te kaupapa nui o te ko te kupu ko te tarukino, engari pia kare he kupu pai tēnā. Nō reira tēnei te mihi kia korua, kia koutou o kuhoa, kia koutou katoa kua tai mai nei I runga I te kaupapa o te pō. Ko hine nui tōku ingoa. You did say it correctly, you said it very, very well, so kia ora Brian.
It was a loving fluke.
Practice, whānau. So yes, my name is Hinenui Juan O'Brien. I position myself very clearly as a Taranaki Te Atiawa Ngātiawa woman. My worldview and my perspectives are informed by how I am placed in this world. I am indigenous to this place, to Taranaki, but like Alvesa, I don't represent the views of all Taranaki people. But I actually grew up in a small community called Tamapahore, situated in Tauranga Moana. And my father was the manager of a kiwi fruit orchard. The local economy was driven by two key sources, kiwi fruit and marijuana, both seasonal and both providing an income at that time for whānau. Growing up, the stereotype around cannabis use was that it was something predominant within poor Māori communities. And growing up, my experiences that I've seen is that that is not the truth. And we would like to think, and we would like to position this drug and come from it in a fear-based perspective that it's something that's rife within poor communities, impoverished communities, Māori communities, people of colour, gangs, but I know teachers, I know professional people, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, people from all walks of life who partake in cannabis. So I am voting yes because I think that people have a choice as to how they may choose to partake in the drug. I also believe that it does cause harm, and it does cause harm for two simple reasons: for health reasons and for criminal justice reasons. And we know that Māori are increasingly overrepresented in negative statistics regarding imprisonment. Some statistics show that they're 3 to 4 times more likely to be arrested and convicted on cannabis-related charges. Other statistics show that they're 7 times more likely to be imprisoned. And we spend millions of dollars policing this drug, and it overwhelmingly, disproportionately affects Māori men. And as a Māori woman, I can't sit back and see our fathers, our sons, our brothers, our whānau members continue to be incarcerated for partaking in a drug that everyday New Zealanders also do. So it's unfair and it's unjust, and it needs to be taken from a criminal justice issue to a health and wellbeing issue. So that's why I have already cast my vote for the cannabis law reform. Kia ora no tātou.
Thank you for that opening position statement. I was reading that last year they estimated that 590,000 New Zealanders use cannabis. 590,000, and that's probably conservative. All right, it's my pleasure now to showcase the proud co-owner of this amazing space. Adnan, thank you so much for allowing us to use this space. This is not a political meeting, this is a discussion, and it's just wonderful not have to interrupt and be rude and worry about ratings and engagement. So it is a discussion. Adnan, just a little bit about you here. Adnan is the co-founder and chief executive of the Johnson Corner. Johnson Corner provides a workspace solutions for businesses of all sizes and has been uplifting the central neighbourhood as an innovation hub, originally from Abu Dhabi. Adnan has worked in the private sector for 15 years in various roles around the world and holds a master's in business degree and business from the UK. Now, the Johnson Corner's mission is to establish a global network of physical spaces in the next 20 years. We're looking forward to your thoughts, and I know you'll be innovative and bring a different perspective to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to Dan for organising this event and for everyone to be here. It's awesome to catch up. I haven't seen a lot of these faces for a long time, so COVID-19, I guess. My view really is how can privatisation enable a better world where cannabis is legalised. So we're talking about investment, we're talking about production, distribution, monitoring, compliance, technology, distribution, e-commerce, retail. It is $1 billion worth of industry, not only just through tax, but through people getting engaged in this industry. So that's really what's exciting about it. I lived in Amsterdam a few years ago, and I lived amongst people who consumed it. I tried it myself, and I really enjoyed it actually. It was really cool, and I haven't tried it since, just to make that clear, in New Zealand. So I've been there, I've experienced it. It never felt anything out of place, sort of thing, and everyone was quite used to it and were aware of what it was and how to consume it and all of that kind of stuff. So I voted yes. I'm really excited to support it, and I'm excited from a business point of view is how we can help nurture that in Taranaki at Johnson Corner, how we can build that ecosystem, how we can attract investment, how we can encourage farmers to grow and export, import, branding, marketing, building businesses, news, media. So that's sort of my position, is how I can help enable that. And I truly believe that privatisation has a strong role to play in making sure that this is done the right way, and improve and iterate and go from there. So it's a great starting point, and I think it will get better. And if you look at the US, the the trends between legalizing same-sex marriage and cannabis are 5 years apart in terms of public perception. So we have done that in New Zealand, legalized same-sex marriage 2012.
Yeah.
So we're long overdue for
In good time for me anyway. So.
Yeah, long overdue for legalizing cannabis and leveraging that as a great opportunity, especially at a time when the economic harm damage that's been done through COVID-19. It's a great opportunity to just unlock a great opportunity. From an economic point of view. There's a Taranaki-based business called Green Fern. They've been doing well. I think they've raised about $2 million. Last time I checked at the company's office, there's 16 pages of companies registered already in New Zealand for cannabis. So there's a lot that's already been happening. Medicinal cannabis is actually legal already since April. So there's a lot of activity happening in that space. I'm quite excited about it actually.
Thank you for that. Just a statistic for the audience and the panel to consider. In the last few years, the police have said we will be using discretion in regard to cannabis, which is code or a euphemism for the fact that unless there is spectacular growing or harvesting or it's gang related, they don't want to know about it. And even with that very moderate approach to enforcement of cannabis, it is still costing the government and the police $200 million per year in enforcement. It's calculated, a study by Burl, the latest report, that conservatively, if cannabis was legalised and regulated, the excise tax would conservatively bring in $697 million, which would be dispersed back into the community for health and education. All right, my pleasure now to showcase Dan Thurston-Crowe. You've organised this. If it goes well, kudos to you. If it goes badly, you can blame me. But it's just wonderful that you had the vision. And the context for this, Alessandri and I were having a coffee and you walked past and I called out because I think you've got a good heart. And we challenged you, do something creative involving the community to put your core values out there. And this was your light bulb moment. Now, it's not a political meeting because you've left it very, very late and you'll be asking the question. I think most people have voted. So a little bit about you and why Anand looked to you like you were going to be the expert as to when that legislation was passed. All right, this is all about you, my friend. Blush. Dan decided to run for top, that's the Opportunities Party, but it's not a political meeting, in New Plymouth, as he sees a challenging future for Taranaki as the fossil fuel industry falls out of favour domestically and globally, and wants to support the region in a transition that grows diversification, innovation and business confidence. A businessman and an environmentalist, his priorities include overhauling the tax and welfare system and growing a sustainable, clean and green economy by rewarding innovation and penalising unsustainable practices. Now, before joining TOP, Thurston-Crowe, Dan, spent 13 years running his communications agency in Auckland, followed by a stint as a vice president of a New Zealand-led US startup, and roughly 4 years as the co-founder and chief product officer of a technology startup in Beijing in China. He and his handsome American husband Thomas, who is in the audience, lovely to see you again, moved to New Plymouth in 2018. They left early last year to volunteer on a conservation ship along the New Zealand Eco Warrior called, what's the correct pronunciation?
Pete Bethune.
Thank you very much. And returned a year later the day level 4 lockdown commenced. Looking forward to your positioning statement. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Brian, and thanks to this awesome panel of people who have joined me to talk about their position and their concern on this issue. And thanks to everyone who's turned up and also everyone who is watching this online. Yeah, so, and thank you, Alessandra and Brian, for stimulating me to think about, you know, what I could do that sort of takes a political angle and depoliticizes it, because I think that's actually the issue that we're facing here, is the law around cannabis is much more around politics than it is around
microphone a bit closer, that's it.
than it is around people. So I am curious to know, firstly, of you guys who have come here tonight, you don't have to tell me which way you are leaning, but who's already 100% made up their mind how they're going to vote on this issue? Show of hands. Oh, okay, so there's the right. So there's a little bit of room, wiggle room. Okay, thank you. So the reason this is really meaningful for me right now is this is not a political event, and I have been exposed to a lot of political discussion around the upcoming referendum, because of course every candidate gets asked, what is your position on this issue? And every single time I've been up on a stage and that question has been asked, the conversation from the stage becomes around, is cannabis good or bad? Do we want our kids having more of it? Do we want to make it more accessible? That, people, has really nothing to do with what this legislation is about. And those people, so many of them have a story around someone that they know who has come to harm through using cannabis. And I have honestly found it extraordinary, and I say this with respect, that on the one hand they can say, this is like, people are getting into harm's way through cannabis, and at the same time they want to maintain the status quo. Like honestly, that just does not make any sense to me. So what I wanted to do really, I think always, human experience and understanding trumps statistics. And what I wanted to do was gather together some people who actually really know what they're talking about, not in terms of whether cannabis is good or bad, because as Hinenui said, drugs cause harm. We know this, there is no question. The question that I am hoping we all leave with is, does the legislation in its current form protect our people, or in the kind of net effect, does it do harm? And so far, every angle that I've looked at in this issue gives me instances of harm being caused by this legislation. So that's the position. My position is absolutely a yes vote, and it's not a yes for cannabis, it's a yes for taking the health and well-being of our citizens seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I'll get you to pass the microphone to Hinenui. I want to talk about the Treaty of Waitangi and Māori, because it's very important. You heard the stats. The most conservative sanitised statistics, which I gave you, were that Māori, until the last 12 months, were at least most conservative 2.5 times more, up to 7-8 times more likely to be hassled, arrested for cannabis, which is, in my opinion, evidence of discrimination, profiling, and maybe even entrenched racism. So I want to get your views on opportunities for Māori in terms of the legislation does actually allow, it has a cap in a region, that there is potential where if you're part of it, there could be potential that you engage with your community. Could you ever see a scenario in Taranaki where we have the education and the control, and there's potential to make money? And are you optimistic? Have you got any kind of thoughts on how it may play out, or is it far too early in respect to this, assuming that it is made legal and we progress?
Yeah, no, there is 100% opportunities in making cannabis legal from this perspective. So my background is in public health, and I'm not talking about the public health system that we have, I'm talking about public health as a discipline to addressing health inequity within New Zealand. It's a relatively new discipline, only born within the 1980s, and recognises that we actually need multiple ways in which we address health issues: community action, education just being one, healthy public policy, helping people related to their interpersonal skills, recognising that we're holistic beings, that we're not just physical beings, and we need to look at the mental, emotional and spiritual well-being of people. So when you put cannabis in a context where it's prohibited and illegal, you actually make it untenable to raise awareness on the issue. It doesn't sit within the public health system. So programs that we would roll out were around sexual health, mental health, tobacco and alcohol, which you can talk about because they're legal. So we actually had a systemic, clear, coherent and consistent public health campaign on those issues that started right from the top. You have agencies such as the Health Promotion Agency, you had specific government agencies that were clear and strategic in what they were trying to achieve. When you put it in a prohibition system, you can't have that. So there is no clear education campaign, public campaign on cannabis at this point in time. We have reactionary systems that respond to it's the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. So we don't have anything right now. So we need to actually, so there'll be a levy on the tax, which is what we have for problem gambling, which is what we have for tobacco, which is what we have for alcohol. We take a portion of the proceeds from the tax and you put it back into the health system. We don't have that at the moment. We have an inadequate health system responding to a very high need, mental health need, not just drug abuse, not just cannabis abuse. There's a lot of compounding factors as to why people suffer from mental distress. So cannabis is just one part of that. And if we actually bring it into a framework where it's legal, we can actually start dealing to it. We can bring it into the light instead of pretending like it's not an issue. And we can just arrest people and criminalise them for it.
Now, I wasn't going to suggest that maybe 1E would decide to cultivate it and make money from it and then with the profits educate people, but in some parts of the world, some Indigenous people have casinos and they grow tobacco, and it's unusual. It may be a mixed signal. So again, we're looking at the Treaty Waitangi and partnership and how we can together have a better outcome. Any more musings from you, and then we'll go through the panel. I know Adnan has got an amazing ability of thinking out of the square in regard to opportunities. So we'll just, for a few more minutes, talk about the Treaty Waitangi and our partnership and how it relates to cannabis.
I don't think there's been any really real clear messaging around that or clear thinking around that, because obviously it's in the referendum stage. But I was pleased when I looked at the proposed bill to see that the way in which they would licence people to be able to sell it, there were three considerations that took into consideration the need of those who would be harmed by it, the needs of the community. So it's not this kind of free-for-all licensing system that would be driven by corporations, but it would be driven by the community need, which is unheard of in a regulatory system. That's not how things are run within tobacco and alcohol companies. So Helen Clark was speaking on it a couple of nights ago, and she said the regulatory framework that's proposed is actually really strong. It's much stronger than what we have on tobacco and alcohol. So that kind of, and we're only at the bill stage. It's not gone through a select committee, so there's still a lot of time to make sure that this is the best framework possible to respond to the health and wellbeing need of people.
Appreciate your expertise and your insight. So again, the Treaty Waitangi and Māori, we are in partnership and acknowledge your expertise, and it's true, there would be a cap, and money raised from an exercise duty would go towards education, and very, very controlled. And I think we all acknowledge the hypocrisy and the inconsistency of attitudes to alcohol and the influences, and it doesn't matter what legislation the government comes up with, there are a lot of people that do the influences. So it will be interesting to see whether they, if of course it gets the yes vote, how it will unfold. Any other comments with respect to the Treaty Waitangi or Māori, or possibly how we could be in partnership in regard to this?
Yeah, just simply, like, this is just a no-brainer for me. It is simply that we are fortunately looking as a society more around how we engage in our partnership, and so I do think this is one of those opportunities we have where where there is quite a stark choice to be made, and I think that in some ways it's an opportunity to send a signal around how we are hopefully starting to pay more attention to overall well-being and community health at right at the grassroots level.
Just to add to that, I mean, it's quite obvious, but especially here within Taranaki colonisation, and the continual kind of colonial impacts on Māori have had an impact on our health and well-being in terms of removal of land, alienation from land, removal of economic base, te reo mea ona tikanga in our culture. So you can look at it from a perspective of people partake in cannabis and that therefore they're wrong, but addiction and the way we treat addiction is not a sign of a person's lack of willpower to resist drugs. It's a sign of spiritual poverty. It's a sign of intergenerational trauma. It's a sign of the lack of intervention to actually address the societal issues such as poverty, such as unequal access to educational opportunities, income, jobs. So we can look at it at a perspective of, oh, those naughty Māoris, or we can actually look at it and bring it into the light and look at the reasons why this is happening. And this is a real opportunity to reinvest back into our Māori health services, into whānau ora, into kaupapa Māori services that we actually know work, that they have always worked with us, that Māori have always been the answer to their own issues. And actually build a high trust relationship with Taranaki iwi, Taranaki whānau, Taranaki hapu. So I don't see this as something that we need to look at through a conservative lens. I see it as a unique opportunity to be transformational and to be world leading in this specific area.
Yeah, sure. Just make a comment, I'll get Adnan to make a comment. Just reflecting on my privileged middle class upbringing, I never learned how to smoke, and I remember when I was 21 I was with a very affluent person. It was a rite of passage that I had to try marijuana. Well, of course I hadn't learned how to smoke, so I can literally say that I tried but I wasn't able to imbibe. And I was, as you were speaking, reflecting on the racism and even the inconsistency of, for some who are affluent, I'm not saying that would go to WOMAD, but for some it's almost like a cool middle class edgy thing to do, and I as you were talking, I was feeling a little bit of ashamed of the stereotypes and how the law in regard to cannabis is stigmatised and marginalised. And I think you've nailed it. Over to you, sir. Adnan.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's a really exciting time for Maori in terms of putting this in place, when we put this new legislation in place, we're creating this new ecosystem, creating this new legal platform, and it's got so much opportunities, and it's a great test model to say, hey, how can we apply a modern thinking to ensure that everything we put in place, it's a equal partnership between Pākehā and Māori. And how do we build the capacity within the Māori community to be growers and to be breed experts, to be... I'm sure there's already a lot of knowledge there, and I've heard some really amazing Māori businesses that are starting to do really well in the medicinal cannabis space. So I'm really excited about that, and I think a lot about, well, what can I do to help create that capacity, to help push businesses forward, to inspire Māori people to get involved in this and do awesome stuff. I think the creativity that they will bring, I'm quite excited to see what's going to come out of that. So it's a great opportunity, as Dan said, and it will be a missed opportunity if we don't include and we rush through this, and there is still a few more steps in place. But the beauty of privatization is all about that, self-initiative. And so I'm really excited to see what they do with this and how this turns out.
All right. Complex question for the panel, and this is from, no. There seems to be anecdotal evidence when they lowered the age of drinking from 20 to 18 that younger people got alcohol more readily, and despite the best intentions of really, really clamping on it, you've got to be 20, etc., and really, really no advertising in a controlled space, and it's just incredible, the controls. It's almost like, really, if it's legal and it's more available, really? Is it really going to improve things? The studies indicate in Canada, who legalised it, and we're going to emulate Canada, is when they legalised it, 2/3 of the revenue from the black market was shut down. But the concern is, those people that are addicted will want to get the hard stuff with the higher toxicity, or THC. Could you sort of tell me how you think it would work? Because in some ways it's almost counterintuitive, even though it seems to be working in Canada. Have you got any thoughts on that? That whole issue of how would it work?
Yeah, so I do find this interesting, and I have to out myself here around. I couldn't care less if I never ever had cannabis again. I'm not a regular user. I have some family members who are daily users, and I have to confess to some concern around what might be the fear of the unknown. And I'm just owning that for myself. That's where I am, and I believe in trust. Actually, trusting that there is a team of 5 million. We are all in this together. And we'll just work it out, just like we worked out alcohol and tobacco and other things. But because I'm not particularly impacted myself personally by this legislation, I went to a very close family member who is, and I asked him what to give me his thoughts, because as I said, lived experience trumps facts and information and data and things like that. It's much more important to actually know the human side of these things. So what he said to me is, he imagines his use will go down when it is legalised. And he gave me a really thoughtful answer. It was because he said, from my dealer, which, so this close family member is in a criminal relationship with a dealer, I get a set amount every month, whether I need to or not, because it maintains my supply. And he said, if I, on 8 o'clock at night, feel like a joint, and I know I can just, make access to it, I don't need to stockpile. Because he said, when I have it, I buy this fixed amount, and I make sure I'm finished it before the next month, whether I want to or not. So, I think there are all of these unknowns, and that we will see when it becomes less stigmatized, when there's not a scarcity mentality around it, and where it's normalized to the point where it's like, will I, won't I, whatever. I can't really speak for myself, but I've enjoyed having conversations with people who are affected and hearing really rational, sensible perspectives from them.
So does the panel think that it's actually going to, lessen the influence of gangs, or does it create an opportunity? Because the against argument is, the gangs will think, bring it on, because we'll provide the stuff with the higher THC toxicity, and we'll make more money, and people are addicted will want the hard stuff, they won't want the legal stuff. Have anyone got any thoughts, preferably based on experience or reading or expertise?
So I grew up in a town called Tokoroa, and there's a certain type of reputation for that town. I'm very proud to come from that town. I wouldn't be here without growing up in that community. But there is a person that I went to school with. He goes by the name of Simba now, and he's a huge weed advocate, and he's been doing this for years, the last at least 6 years. And he has been in a position where he's been able to travel the world interviewing people from areas that have legalised, who haven't legalised, and it's impacted them in different ways. He has videos of interviews with blurred out faces of criminals, of sellers who have admitted on these videos they do not want cannabis legalised because they don't pay tax on their income, and they can they've figured out ways to do it where they make a lot of money and they don't contribute anything back to society other than potentially harm for some people who don't have access to regulation, the proposed regulations that we have the opportunity of taking on if we vote yes. There is evidence out there, videos of people who are currently selling in the black market who do not want to hand it over to the community to regulate and to have a say, and to this legislation is able to change depending on what we discover as we navigate this space.
But yeah, it's out there. There's information out there that you can look up, and you can watch people admit that this is great for us on the black market, and yeah, we don't want that regulation.
I was actually a chaplain in Tokoroa in 1995, and they were very excited back then. They had Georgie pie, and but that wasn't the only good thing at Tokoroa. The hospitality and the people there were wonderful. Interesting times. Anyone else would like to share on the issue of, okay, more controls, we legalise it, it's counterintuitive, it seems to be improving things in Canada, but if it's more readily available, even though it's not in public, 2 plants per person, 4 plants per household, 14 grams, which means nothing to me. You've read the bill, Adnan, what have you got to share?
On your first question,
Sure.
when I was in Amsterdam, one of the touristy things I did was to go check out the red light district, right? And when I got there, it was just built in middle of the town, where all the houses are and all people live, and people use that district to commute. And one of the things that fascinated me is where parents, with their 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds holding hands, just come out of the supermarket, going past the red light district to go home. And I thought, what's going on here? Why would you bring your kids here? And I started talking to a few parents, and they said, oh, this is just normal, and the answer to anything to kids is education. The more we make them aware to this, the more we help them understand, the better it is for them. So I really believe in that education, as we shouldn't fear this thing, but we should face it with courage and use education as a powerful tool to take us through it, through experimentation, through making sure we quickly respond to what is not working and what is working. And I think to the second question, if I lived in New York in the 60s, I would be very intimidated by the Italian mobs, right? But I wouldn't feel that today. But they still exist, they're still there. I think the power of legalizing it is we're gonna make that so negligible that the majority of the people are going to consume it from a regulated market. Yes, the potency level is going to be interesting to see how that plays out. In Uruguay, they went with 5, I think, or very low, and people stopped buying it from the legal places because it was not good enough. So it will be interesting to see. There will be competition with creating better quality products. And I know in Amsterdam they tried to reduce it to 15, and a lot of people were extremely upset about that because it was a different experience to what they experienced. So I do think, education, face it with fear, quickly respond, make sure the legislation and the process around that is that we quickly fix the things, and continue to use the power of awareness, education, and media to shift the buying power. I don't think the gangs are ever going to go away, or the illegal market's ever going to go away, but we're going to reduce the size of it and penetrate the market and make sure that as much as of that is legal.
When I was young, smoking was cool. You know, they sponsored sport and TV and placement and, you know, the influences. And if you look at how we're approaching tobacco, you know, with the labelling, it's kind of not cool anymore to smoke. And in fact, I think, and I've got to be careful here, I don't go into your area of expertise, but the packaging, if you could just turn that, that's it. If you look at the packaging and the whole thing, it's not cool anymore, but it was. But there is an opportunity if we legalise cannabis for someone potentially to make a lot of money. You don't think the influencers will come in? Because I would contend at the moment that smoking cannabis is a very, very cool thing for wealthy middle class people that have been doing it. And I think they enjoy it. And I'm kind of wondering, with this legislation, it's no longer cool. It's all behind closed doors and it's regulated and there's warnings and so forth. But won't it still be cool? You know, and the influencers? You just need to turn one.
Yeah, the people, most of the people I know who consume cannabis are affluent people who do it because it fits their lifestyle and they enjoy it, and they escape notice. They are not the people who are going to be pinged for it. So I honestly, I know enough people who are really regularly users. And by the way, when I was in Washington last year, Thomas and I spent time with people, very well educated, affluent people, who in that market, in which it was legal and controlled, it was just a normal thing to do. Do we have a what was the drink in Manhattan, or do we have an edible? It hadn't actually changed their lives. It just became the new normal. So I don't think that, at that level anything's going to change.
I think that the other kind of moral issues that we've seen here within New Zealand around prostitution reform, same-sex marriage, smoke-free environments, anything to do with whether people agree or disagree, there's always this fear, and it's rightly so. We should be concerned, we should look at the evidence, and we should look at what the evidence is telling us regarding harm. And I think that this notion that all the youth are going to get it and they're going to smoke it and it's going to be this really big, terrible thing, just sets us up to be adults who lie to our young people, to be completely honest, because what they end up doing is they end up experimenting and they end up partaking in things and they think, wow, this thing that my dad said was terrible and the world's worst thing isn't actually so, and there is no trust, and adults can't be honest and real and transparent with me. So I think within Te Ao Māori we have a saying, mā te marama ka mōhio, mā te mōhio ka matau, mā te matau ka ora. Marama being the light, marama being the moon. Let's bring things into illumination. Once you illuminate a topic and you can see it clearly, you gain knowledge on a topic. Once you gain knowledge, you gain wisdom. Once you gain wisdom, you gain life. So don't stay in the dark and pretend like things aren't happening. Bring it out into the open. Have an honest dialogue with your children about it. Of course you can give your viewpoints, but if they're not based on fact, if they're not based on the best evidence available, then they're just going to think that we're constantly lying to them. And guess what? After the prostitution law reform went through, after same-sex marriage went through, after smoke-free environments went through, actually the culture did shift and it did change and the world didn't fall down around us. And it didn't, overseas, the information that I've seen overseas regarding Canada, the United States, there may have been a slight increase, and I'm talking like 1 to 2%, but that's often got to do with the way in which research is conducted, and people actually self-identifying that, okay, now it's legal, I'm actually going to own that I do partake in marijuana, I'm not going to lie anymore. So there hasn't been a huge surge of increase overseas that we can see.
All right, if you've just arrived, this is not a political meeting, this is a discussion on cannabis. It's being professionally filmed, it's going to be uploaded soon on YouTube. I'm happy for someone from the audience to ask a question that's less than 30 seconds, and if you are, just come to the front and you can ask a question. I've got questions for Africa, but you're there. Would someone like to come forward and put a question to the panel?
Nah.
No, I think it'd be nice because we're filming it for you to come up here and just... You are the man, and I want to congratulate you for all the meetings you're going to. So there you are, my friend. Your question. You'll be part of the filmed discussion.
So I just want to know: is there? I'll explain where this comes from very quickly.
Can you introduce yourself? You've got a beautiful name.
Kia ora everybody. Hohepa Timwana, affectionately known as Eps. I've had a few people come up to me and approach me, say they've checked out the podcast Best Side, so I'm the host of that. So kia ora.
Your question.
Question. I've had friends that have gone to, as the bro Dan explained, their dealer, and gone to get some weed, cannabis, whatever you want to call it, and the dealer's actually said to them, I'm actually out of weed, but I've got a bit of meth if you'd like some. I want to know, is there any direct relation or correlation between the legalisation of marijuana, and do you think it will have any sort of effect on meth?
Good question. Or another way of putting it, is cannabis like a gateway to harder drugs, or the beginning of the end?
There's been this rhetoric that cannabis is a gateway drug, that tobacco is a gateway drug. You could view it in that, or you could actually look at the evidence which suggests that earlier that you start smoking weed, aka when you're a young person, the more likely you are to become addicted or partake in it more often. So what we actually need to do is have education targeted towards young people. Regarding meth, that's a whole nother argument in itself. I think that there is concern. I think we should be more concerned about methamphetamine use than we should be about cannabis use, and that allowing cannabis to be regulated would mean that we can actually focus more on the drugs that are causing the most amount of harm, which is P and methamphetamine. We're taking up too many resources, criminal justice resources. It's absorbing our time looking at low drug use, low harm drug use, such as cannabis. We need to be focusing more on methamphetamine.
All right, a specialised question. Someone else from the panel, and then we'll invite Rusty. Quick question. Like I said, it's not a political meeting, but Rusty, lots of love from us. Good to see you here.
Rusty. Someone explained to me just in the weekend, actually, this beautiful thing, which is cannabis is not a gateway drug, it's a gateway relationship. So that's actually, here's what you're describing, is once you have that relationship with that distribution network, shall we call it, then we are setting up our kids in these relationships where there is so much potential for it to go wrong, and that's why this is called the legalize and control cannabis, because we've got to get our people out of those relationships where they can be swung from one thing to another. There is no evidence, I believe, even of cannabis being addictive, or certainly not anywhere to the degree that alcohol or tobacco are, or sugar for that matter. So I think sorry, I've actually just lost my train of thought. It is simply that. My train was when the Opportunities Party, not a political broadcast, had a legalising policy in 2017, but that was based on research in which Gareth Morgan went and talked to Māori iwi across the motu, and heard about specific instances in which dealers were manipulating supply, so because meth was a much more viable, more addictive, better product to be selling. So they were manipulating supply of cannabis so that they could get more people onto meth.
All right, Rusty, you can come to the front and ask a question, and as you do, I just want to acknowledge Mike Gerard, engineer, and for the last 2 or 3 years weekly, Mike Gerard has shared evidence and persuaded me and influenced me to consider the rationale of legalising cannabis, and it's great to have you here. This is a question, sir. Come to the front, and your question to the panel.
Well, I disagree. I think marijuana is a gateway drug.
Your question, that's the question.
I'm just saying because I'm coming off the back of this here, and I think that young people being young people, what's to stop them mixing it with the drugs of today?
So is that your question?
Yes, I still think that young people will mix it like they do their alcohol, and they will do with their drugs, and it's a time bomb in itself.
So really the question is, do you agree with Rusty? You've heard his concern, and that's a question, and he's made a statement. Over to you, sir.
Okay. So going back to Hohepa, I think the questions kind of linked together.
Yes.
It's simply a supply issue, right? So if we solve the supply issue and also regulate that where the drug dealers don't change the supply and say, hey, I won't make a lot of money on that, so I'm gonna say now that I have this instead, do you want that? So if we make it legal, we solve that issue. Yes, it's a supply issue, but yes, Rusty's also got a good point. There's gonna be people who want to try and experiment and want to mix and things like that. That's also going to happen, and that can be.
That's already happening though.
That's already happening, and through legalizing it, we have a platform to educate not to do that and the impacts of that. So I think it's a simple supply. If we regulate it and control that, then I think we would see less of that.
as a young person, I strongly disagree that young people, I don't think we give young people enough credit. They're so much more intelligent today than even my generation. When I was in high school, I was not as, educated as half the 12-year-olds that I educate around environmental science. They have access to information that we didn't have when we were their age. They have role models who have learnt from our mistakes in the past or what we've observed growing up. This is just an example. When I was teaching snorkeling with my Highlands Intermediate class, there was a woman that came out, she was completely changed, but she told me after the girls had left that she'd been overhearing their conversations, and she was so astounded that they were talking about engineering at the age of 11 and 12 because of awesome stuff that they'd seen on the internet. And they were like, I want to build this, and I'm thinking about this. And I'm like, you're 12, you're not even at SEA level 1. And the same thing with chemistry and environmental sciences. There's so much information out there that they have access to. We have the opportunity with this legislation to compile what we understand, what we want to understand without the stigma, and provide our young people the education and the tools to allow them to make those decisions for themselves. And they can't make those decisions if this issue is stigmatised and they are provided with opportunities where they only have the space of fear. And that's where we're at the moment, is that when young people are put in a position where they feel like they need to make a decision, peer pressure, all that kind of stuff, they can't even go to their parents because it's so stigmatised, and even if they're caught, doing something or consuming a cannabis at a young age, they don't know what they're doing because they can't ask for help or they can't ask for guidance. And so this legislation provides a framework that will reduce that harm, that risk of harm as well. So I'm sorry, Rusty, but I disagree.
Yeah. Another question?
No, we'll go through the panel. Rusty, you made a statement and it was an implicit question.
I grew up in a community, as I stated at the start of this discussion, where marijuana was easily accessible. But like other communities where we have high population of Māori and the prevalence of drugs, these communities are actually incredibly strong, resilient communities. They are not what the stereotypes say they are. To be able to exist in a framework in which they have been alienated from their land, alienated from their culture, and continue to be able to survive shows that they're incredibly strong and resilient. And despite having very easy access to marijuana, I did not feel pressured. It was not offered to me. I was not groomed into that. There were gangs where we grew up. My school was next to a gang. That was not the culture that I was raised in. I didn't partake in marijuana until I was in high school, and I partook in it on high school grounds. I was so terrified because I was caught, and I was put into a corner and I was asked to fill out a worksheet on smoking because that's what everyone thought I did. That was a unique opportunity for the system to be able to respond to my needs as a young Māori woman and to be able to help and intervene in a way that would have improved my chances of not partaking in it ever again. But it wasn't. It was punitive. I was punished. I was embarrassed in front of the whole school. I was sent into a corner where everyone could visibly see me outside the deputy principal's office. So this notion of young people are going to be misled, they're going to make poor choices, I just don't think it's adequate, and I think we need to give young people more credit.
Thank you.
All right, do we have another question after Dan's comment? Apart from Rusty, we're not barring you from a second question, but inclusion is a good thing. Over to you.
Yeah, so Rusty, with respect, and this is not really aimed at you, but it's your question. The whole reason I wanted to bring together this sort of degree of expertise and lived experience and people who are really connected to their communities is because I don't think there's merit in I believe this, and this is what young people are, and this is what they do. I think we do. I understand the temptation to categorize people and then speak on their behalf, make predictions on their behalf. And I think it's like the whole foundation of this question is what is the evidence for the protection that the legislation offers against the harm that is being done by people, what did you say, over 500,000 Kiwis using an illicit substance already, and there being no framework for dealing with it because we just say it's illegal and therefore we take a punitive approach to every aspect of it and it keeps it in the dark. And I don't want to go anywhere beyond the evidence that is not the society that I want to see my son growing up in, and hopefully he might have kids and I look to a future in which there is much more trust and much more freedom and much more sense of community and collective responsibility around how we all behave, and not people being judged and classified and effectively being written off.
One of the opening comments we made, Rusty, was the police in the last 2 or 3 years have a policy of discretion in regard to enforcement of cannabis. So essentially, unless it's outstanding gang-related harvesting, they're ignoring it. And there's only been 230 arrests in the last year. 5 people went to jail and they opted to go to jail because they couldn't pay the fine. So you'd really have to do something spectacular now with cannabis to... Sorry. Well, I'm just telling you... Beg your pardon? Well, I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm just sharing all the academic stuff that I was reading in association with the bill. And you're welcome to come forward and share your experience if you want to. Would you like to come and do that? I mean, it adds to the credibility. And thank you for sharing that. So you just come to the front, because I think that's really relevant you share that, because all the information that I'm sharing is associated with the bill. It purports to be impartial. It's got academics, the Drug Foundation and the police. And if you can, we'll get you just turn around, and it's lovely to see you. So, no, it's a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you for joining the discussion. If you could just start with your name and then share your experience.
Hi everyone, I'm Nick. I have a very, very rare connective tissue disorder, about 1 in maybe 40 in the world. It affects my whole body. Obviously, I've got a chair and a feeding tube and braces and blah blah blah. Cannabis has saved my life, and so the only way to get it a few years ago was to grow it. And 2.5 months ago, the police knocked on my door, obviously unannounced, and they had a search warrant and they took all my medicine. So it is. I do wonder how good it has been. I've noticed you saying how much I got off because I'm white, and I think that's disgusting. But also the fact that police do use their discretion, but they also don't.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you sharing that, because there's one thing to have all the stats associated with the impartial discussion with the bill, and we can't refute your personal experience.
Exactly.
And I just really, really appreciate and affirm that you're here and sharing that. So, expert evidence. Yeah.
So are you growing again?
The way we're all going, if the panel is indicative of the referendum, you will be able to have 2 plants and 4 for the household. And I kind of get the impression that the police really don't want to do enforcement of cannabis, and I'm wondering who will do the enforcement.
I know. Well, I thought, since they were at my house, I thought I might as well tell them all about our endocannabinoid system and how our receptors, it works on our bodies and how good it is. And one of them even gave me a hug when they left, so I don't think they actually wanted to do it either.
Yeah.
Well, that is an incredible, irrefutable, expert bit of evidence that you've shared. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Please come to the front. No. Oh, you don't want to be filmed? No, and I respect that. So you share your question, and if people can't hear, I'll echo it.
Cool. My question's more not about whether cannabis cannabis, yay, nay, like I'm personally yay.
Yes.
But mine's more about how are we going to get the licenses and, you know, the business aspects of it. So the licensing
All right.
at this stage, you know, through the grower, you can't be retail selling.
Yes, that's right.
You know, can we give some...
No, really good question, because there are business opportunities. So Elvisa is the environmental scientist, and she seems keen, which is great.
Also that, and then if you could cover too, which was lightly touched on, the percentage. Like I think there's growers out there that maybe want to get the, you know, get in there, or they don't, because they think that cap of the percentage of the THC is going to be too low. And then, you know, so a myriad of things around that. And I was just checking over some of the stuff just before on my phone discreetly, and you sort of said a cup of tea of cannabis might be nice as well, but that's not actually going to be a thing.
That'll be illegal, won't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a drinkable, not a edible. So yeah, just some light around the licensing.
And not being nosy, do you yourself or for your friends, are you interested in the entrepreneurial opportunities if cannabis is legalised? Which is quite legitimate, by the way. Over to you, Elvisa.
I'm already involved in legitimate cannabis
Awesome.
business as a shareholder. I'm not actually an operator, but I'm certainly interested in that.
Well, again, thank you for coming, and you have expertise, and that adds to the credibility of the discussion.
So before I read a direct quote from the New Zealand Government website under this legislation, proposed legislation, a lot of the legislative sort of regulations around the business side of things is, I know this is your field, but I did a little looking into it myself. In America, they found that, you know, different states have different regulations around the federal. Oh no, they don't have it's just different states have their own regulations. They found, you know, they had set up these social enterprises that that gave permission for people who had been charged with possession or cultivation or whatever, to transition their skills and upskill them and educate them so that they could set up their own businesses, cannabis businesses. And unfortunately, big companies bought them out, and it just completely stepped on, you know, fledgling social enterprises and small businesses. We are in the unique position, as I mentioned earlier, where we can learn from that, and we have proposed stronger regulations that deal with those issues. So it says a cap would limit the amount of cannabis available for sale in the licensed market. Licensed businesses would apply for a portion of the cap. The authority would be able to adjust the cap each year as required. So obviously trial and error, sort of navigating that space.
Yeah, I looked at that, and that's like 20%.
It says no license holder would be able to hold more than 20% of the cap, but as mentioned.
So do you think that will be like 5 major companies, so buying up the little people? So
Well, it would be.
what will happen with the micro grower who wants to get the license? That it's going to be hard for them to get licensing, and there's going to be all these extra costs and things, which maybe will push them out of that whole situation.
Who knows? We haven't tried it yet, so how do we know?
It seems like the same way that a company would apply a micro cultivate, that the small businesses would apply the same way as another business would apply. So it's the same method of trying to get licensing. It's no different, but I think that they will be looking closely at whether that will happen, and definitely the licensing authority looks at community input, whether this is going to be detrimental to small businesses. So I think that's being factored in, but yeah.
I guess that's a concern too. Like when I was reading, it's going to be the public that decides whether or not they want the cannabis cafe up the road to be open. And like other over 18 industries in New Plymouth as well, no one really in the main street or the CBD area was really for some of those things before. So, you know, how will that be initiated?
Well, given that there's opportunities, it would be wonderful if we could kind of go local, and the bill does imply that there's an expectation that you look at partnership and the opportunities in the community, and I think clearly the council would be involved and clearly partnering iwi and the community. This is our community, and it would be an absolute travesty and a mockery of the legalising it if multinationals came in and we had 3 or 4 dominant companies not giving locals a look in. So I really appreciate your question, because you're looking at it from a different perspective and putting a positive perspective on it with opportunities.
As business and the business industry is already ready, but it's just I'm just trying to understand how the licensing.
Edna, do you want to get involved here?
Normal person can actually get one.
Just on this whole issue of opportunities in business, you've heard the question. It's quite specialised.
Yeah, I think the rule should always be that everybody gets equal opportunity. But as we know in the private sector, that's never the case, because it's who's putting the investment where it's going. Bigger businesses can showcase they have much more resources around regulation and compliance and monitoring and all of that kind of stuff compared to a small business or a micro grower, and it's much more easier to regulate. So that those issues are always going to be there, and I don't think that's going to put off the micro growers to grow and compete in that space and create whatever their unique advantage is going to be, as in any business where we have to showcase why our product is better and why should we consume this or that. So I haven't looked into that in detail. But if it is a free market, then everybody should have the right to apply, and I think that legislation should allow that. I would be pretty pissed off if I went to the company's office to say I want to open up an innovation hub in Taranaki, someone turned back and said, no, you can't because there's already too many, or there's 2 or 1. I'll be like, well, no, it's a free market. So I'll look into it. I think we can chat more about this, but I hope that the process that we go through, it is as flexible as possible within and also trusting of small micro growers. One of the things that trusting of them in terms of compliance. One of the things that I am experiencing a lot within Johnson Corner, the new startups, new businesses, that startups are tackling compliance, health and safety first before they go that far. So that's really shifting, and that's something we do as well, is how do we tackle these things that usually bigger companies tackle better. So I hope that everybody gets an equal opportunity and license to operate and yeah.
I think that answers my question.
Did you see? Oh, sorry.
All right, use the microphone. Yep.
Sorry. Did you see the part where it says part of the cap would be set aside for micro cultivators? So.
Yes, I did, but it's more about licensing. Where is that going to be obtainable? Like you're saying, if you want to go open a company, it costs X, costs this, that, and the next thing. Those people may not be in a position without an investor, for example, to be able to get the licensing. And then they're going to be like, oh, I don't want to do it now, that's a pain in the butt. So that brings me to the one other question that I had, was to do with around what will happen, because it will still be a crime for people who don't have a licence, and what is, that they're going to get fined $50,000, go to jail for 2 years.
Yeah, well, there'll be very strict enforcement in regard to that.
It's quite interesting in terms of, do we want this to be a high barrier to entry market or low barrier to entry market? If we do a high barrier to entry market, so a lot of growers will say, well, we're going to just stay legal, right? Because we're going to get more customers, because a lot of more people are trying it. So, if they want a better product, they can come to us. Word of mouth spreads like fire. If we want a low barrier to entry market, then we can encourage the growers to come into the legal space. And I was watching Patrick Gower's show, and Gandalf is one of the characters in there, and he was indicating that he will still stay in that illegal space. So that was quite interesting to me. So what are we going to do about encouraging, motivating people who want to partake? And that has to be a big part of the program. It's not just about the public or people using it, but how is the ecosystem going to be shaped and stimulated and yeah. I think Dan. Yeah.
So I am just curious. And genuine curiosity, by the way. Do your questions affect whether or not you will vote yes or no in the referendum?
No, they don't.
Yeah.
They're just interested.
No, they're really
Yeah,
good
yeah.
questions about business opportunities.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, I'm just curious because I'm a journalist. Is it your vision to open a 20-plus cafe, which would be really, really cool? Because the way I read the bill, it really made it uncool. But if you were opening a cafe and it was cool, and it was upmarket and it was legal, it would bring vibrancy, even though it kind of does my head in. But because I hear of people coming back from Amsterdam and America saying, oh, I went to these cafes and it was cool. But when I read the bill, everything about the control is to make it uncool. And all of a sudden you've kind of made it cool from an entrepreneurial business opportunity. So are you curious, are you thinking of opening a cafe?
No, I definitely don't want to open the cafe.
Yes.
But I do want to somehow bridge the gap between the licensing, like the health and safety officer, and
Yes.
this whole legislation is about monitoring it and,
Right.
who's going to check that everyone's making it at 15
Yeah.
THC.
And that's a big issue. Who's going
Who's
to do the monitoring and the
Yeah,
enforcement?
that's right. And then, that's great. And then I'd be happy if it was strong
Yeah.
personally. But, how will that?
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, we've been going for about 70 minutes. Do you want the panellists to wrap it up with a comment? We've had a good discussion. What you've shared is good. The audio may not be great. So, what would you like? It's your discussion. Would you like a closing executive comment from all of the panellists? Have you had enough? Edward, there's no obligation for you to go after a certain time. You've been very long suffering. What do we want to do?
Parting thought.
Parting thought. We'll start with you, Adnan.
Okay, yeah.
This could be 2 minutes or 90 seconds. A closing comment, a parting thought.
Okay, so really excited about this being legalised through the right, robust process. Great, strong starting point, but want to emphasise that we have to reiterate, make it better, and solve all the problems. And really excited about everybody getting involved and providing that feedback back and forth. Hey, have you thought about this? Hey, have you thought about that? How would this work? How would that work? I think that's really exciting. We have to continue doing that. So if we have to start a forum or a group or a think tank at Johnson Corner, let's talk about that. How can we stimulate that? How can we be involved? Should we create a physical hub where people can come and test and grow and learn and commercialize these ideas? Let's do that. Let's talk about how we can enable that. So I'm really excited about how I can be part of the solving the problem. That's where I thrive and I enjoy being part of that process. Not so much the legal or the policy or all of that kind of stuff. So really excited about what does it mean for Taranaki's economy? How can we attract talent here? What differentiates us? Is it the soil? Is it the temperature? Is it where we are located? How do we tell the story to the world about Taranaki and what we're doing about this? So that's my statement. Very excited and thank you for coming tonight.
Let's go along this way. Yep. Yeah. So thanks so much for coming along. So I asked at the beginning whether how many people were kind of susceptible to changing their vote when they came along here. Just show of hands. Has anyone changed their mind about the way they're going to vote? Anyone? Okay, nobody. Show of hands. Did anyone learn something they didn't know about the bill itself? Oh, awesome! Almost 100%.
Yeah, I learned a lot from the audience.
Yeah. Nice work, everyone. So, what I care about in this case is that you know what you're voting for. And so it's a win for me that everyone who came along seems to have learned something about it. So I think that's really awesome. I think what we have in Aotearoa is a history of, if we can get the politics out of our issues, if we can devolve the decision making and the solutions to our communities, the communities who are interested in these things and trust them, we have success. I have to say that we have a 3-year term, and a consideration for me, in all honesty, is what would happen if a more conservative government came in. Would the legislation that's passed this time around, if it goes through, would it be resilient enough to go through successive changes in government. And I think the answer to that is only democracy. If we know what we want, and we trust ourselves and each other, then we get to demand the kind of leadership that we deserve, and we get to demand that politicians don't make point-scoring exercises out of these issues where people's lives are literally at stake. So I'm really encouraged by people coming along and to this and participating in a forum like this. So thank you very much. You are all our future, and we are all in this together. So thanks very much.
I don't know how to follow that up because that was really inspiring and kind of hit the nail on the head. What I didn't mention was the environmental impacts of cultivation. So just quickly, when I find the page. Yeah, so I'm not blind to the risks of to the environment, as well as all the social impacts that we've talked about. We are currently reviewing the freshwater management plans, and so I think it's a good time to have this movement so that we can actually consider that when we're reforming all these environmental legislation. I understand that it takes water to grow plants, but plants are good for the soil, better than short pieces of grass, and it's just an additional incentive for farmers to diversify and educate not just themselves but our communities. And I would personally like to see more green thumbs in the community. I've only just developed mine from growing vegetables, and this is just another plant that we can that will potentially contribute towards the benefit of our environment. And yeah, I think this is a really exciting time. Whether or not this bill goes through, we've had this discussion. We've had these opportunities to openly talk about it, rather than sit in the dark and be afraid to talk about it. So thank you everyone for coming along, and for everyone who's shared their thoughts and information, knowledge. It's great.
Kia ora no tātou. At the start, I mentioned that the two main causes of harm from our current legislation is regarding the criminal justice system and the way that it disproportionately affects Māori, in particular Māori men. We have somewhat of 9,000 men in our prison systems, half of those being Māori. This single issue alone would mean that we would see, some predictions predict 1,200 Māori men would no longer be incarcerated. And that alone is a huge incentive for us to vote yes, and we can't discount the utter harm that being incarcerated has on not just Māori men but their whānau, their babies, their children, the wider whānau, their ability to re-enter the workforce, the ability to create income, the ability to feel like a valued member of our society, the stigma that it causes. So I think we really need to look at who this legislation disproportionately affects. And on the note of actual harm, from a clinical point of view, what we're seeing within our mental health services, because we are looking at it in a punitive way, in a punishable way, is we actually see, and I don't speak for Taranaki schools, but on a population level, a large number of young people entering into mental health services for really low usage of marijuana. What that does is it increases the wait list for actual people who have acute mental distress and mental health disorders. So we're coming from a perspective of, you've been caught smoking dope, I'm going to send you off to the AOD counsellor, and it just creates huge waiting lists for that workforce to be able to deal with, when they could actually have interventions within the school. They could actually have an education intervention, rather than making these wait lists so huge, and then these young people who actually have high needs aren't being seen to. So we actually, as we've all said, we need to bring it out into the light. We actually need to have proper discourse and discussion on it, which we can do as we shape the legislation once it gets passed.
And just a final comment from me before we thank a few people. I was the example of the conservative, brought up a very strict Seventh-day Adventist. The body's the temple of God, no smoking, nothing. I've had church members shot by mentally unhinged people. Stephen Anderson, I've gone to jail to visit people with cannabis. I've got all the anecdotal shock one-liners to be against it, but I've realised that the law is an ass. The police don't want to enforce it. It's not solving the problem. We'd be crazy not to try to be more enlightened, to have education. What have we got to lose? And if I can sort of move and give it a go and make a start, then I'm appealing to whoever's watching the video. What have we got to lose by voting yes and giving it a go, and see if we can have a model predicated on trust, on supposedly empirical data, and the way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to put your hands together and acknowledge Dan. This was his idea, this brainchild. We would have loved more people, but the very discerning, educated audience, and huge expression of thanks for the community service of Mad Media, filming it, creating some content. Adnan in this wonderful space called the Johnson Corner. And most importantly, you, because you made the effort to come here tonight. Thank you so much for being part of our discussion. Go well. Cheers.
And thank you, Brian, for a masterful job.